There is a peculiar loneliness that comes with vision. Not eyesight vision, the kind that awakens in the marrow, that rearranges the inner architecture of a person, that makes the world shimmer in a way most people insist is impossible. It is the burden of those who see patterns where others see noise, who sense meaning pulsing beneath the static of ordinary life. It begins quietly at first, like a faint knocking at the door of the mind. A question you didn't intend to ask. A shift in the light inside your skull. You notice things. Tiny things. Things most people step over without a second thought. The stranger's eyes that carry a storm they never speak of. The silence between words that says more than the words themselves. The way fear masquerades as ambition. The way desire disguises itself as certainty. The way people narrate their lives like actors who have forgotten they're inside a play. You begin to see the machinery behind the curtains. And suddenly, your life is no longer simple. Because to see what others don't is to live in two worlds at once. The world people perform for each other, and the world that actually is. And the friction between the two begins to heat your bones. At first, you think you're imagining it. That the veil isn't lifting, you're just overanalyzing. Everyone else seems so confident, so sure. They accept the surface of things like children, accept the rules of a game. But then something in you refuses to go back to sleep. You remember moments, quiet, small moments, that carved permanent fault lines inside you. A conversation with a dying grandparent who spoke with a wisdom their younger self never had. A heartbreak that cracked you open in the exact place you needed to break. A night of stillness where the stars seemed unbearably honest. A book, a sentence, a stranger's passing comment that felt like it was meant only for you. And a voice inside whispers, "There is more, there has always been more." This is where vision begins. And where danger begins. Because when you see what others don't, you can never again unsee it. You walk into a crowded room and you don't merely see people, you see the stories animating them. The longings that have followed them since childhood, the masks, the fears, the unsaid sentences vibrating beneath their ribs. You see the collective hypnosis of a society rushing toward an idea of success no one can define. You see the quiet rebellion in someone's eyes. You see the grief in the way a person laughs too loudly. You see people arguing about trivialities because their true wounds terrify them. You see the dreamers hiding in spreadsheets, the artists hiding in suits, the children hiding inside adults who forgot how to play. But here is the danger. Most people don't want to see. Not because they are incapable, but because vision asks for a price that comfort will not pay. And when someone who does see begins to speak, the world reacts as it always has. With suspicion. With the unease of villagers watching a lone wanderer return from the mountain with eyes too bright. With the quiet hostility reserved for those who disturb the collective sleep. This is the ancient pattern. Socrates drank poison. Giordano Bruno burned. Mystics became madmen. Prophets were stoned. Poets starved. Visionaries were exiled or crucified or dismissed as eccentric. Not because they were wrong, but because they were too early. To see what others don't is to live in a house with windows on all sides while others cling to rooms with no light. You describe the sunrise, and they accuse you of inventing fire. You talk of transformation, and they label you naive. You speak of unity, and they call you unrealistic. You question the narratives everyone else clings to, and you become dangerous. But the danger cuts both ways. Because once you see deeply, the world you once relied on begins to dissolve. The ambitions you inherited from everyone else feel hollow. The roles you played lose their meaning. The identity you worked so hard to sculpt slips between your fingers. You begin to understand why people cling to comfort. Vision destabilizes everything. Your relationships shift. Your values shift. Your priorities rearrange themselves like stars, forming a new constellation. You find yourself unable to participate in conversations that revolve around the weather of the trivial. You feel alien in places that once felt familiar. You examine your life and realize that you've built entire chapters to satisfy expectations you no longer subscribe to. It's not arrogance. It's not superiority. It's the unavoidable recalibration that occurs when the mind encounters a deeper truth. But here is the deeper danger, perhaps the greatest one. Seeing does not automatically grant you wisdom. It can, instead, deliver you into confusion, isolation, and despair. Because what do you do when you see the patterns of human suffering repeating endlessly? When you see the self-deception people cling to as a lifeline? When you see a world intoxicated with speed, drowning in noise, starving for silence yet terrified of it? You begin to ask questions that unsteady the ground beneath your own feet. What do I do with this? What is my place now that I see differently? How do I live in a world that does not wish to look? And if I speak, who will understand? This is the precipice where the seer often stumbles. Some collapse into cynicism. Some shrink themselves to fit back into the crowd. Some pretend they never saw what they saw. Some turn their vision into arrogance and lose their humanity. Some drown in the sea of their own insights. But there are others, rare, luminous others, who learn to walk through this world with the grace of those who see but do not demand, who understand but do not impose, who awaken but do not preach. Alan Watts once hinted at this paradox when he said, "When you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't." He understood the absurdity of trying to force vision upon the unwilling. He understood the futility of explaining the sky to someone who has lived their entire life underground. He understood that truth is not a weapon, but a mirror. And a mirror is useless to those who refuse to look into it. But he also understood something even more challenging. The burden of seeing becomes a gift only when you learn to carry it lightly. It is like holding a lantern in a cave. If you clutch it too tightly, the flame dies. If you swing it wildly, you disorient yourself and others. But if you hold it gently, it illuminates just enough for you to take the next step. And maybe, just maybe, someone walking behind you will notice the soft glow and feel a little less afraid of the dark. This is the paradoxical danger of vision. It destabilizes the old self, isolates you from the familiar, and sets you apart. But it is also the birthplace of awakening, the crack where the light enters, the doorway through which new worlds emerge. Vision shakes you not to destroy you, but to transform you, to peel away the layers of who you thought you were, to remind you that much of what you called life was merely habit, to show you that the world is not made of solid walls but of stories, and stories can be rewritten. The danger, therefore, is not in seeing. The danger is in refusing to grow into the person your vision demands you become. For a long time, the one who sees is tempted to shrink themselves, to pretend, to dim, to hide, to play small so as not to frighten others. But you cannot unsee. You cannot return to the old mythology that once comforted you. You cannot unknow the truth that loosened the hinges of your former life. A person who has awakened cannot return to sleep without paying a terrible price, the slow erosion of their own soul. And so you begin the second journey. The journey not of seeing, but of learning to live with sight. You learn to speak in ways that do not overwhelm. You learn to remain silent when silence is wiser than explanation. You learn that truth is not a hammer but a seed. You learn that seeing is not the end of the path. It is the beginning of responsibility. In time, a strange thing happens. The very sensitivity that once isolated you becomes the bridge that connects you to others. Because behind the layers of fear, denial, and distraction, every person is starving for someone who sees them. Not the persona, not the performance, but them, their longing, their grief, their buried hunger to be understood, their forgotten brilliance. And perhaps this is the real danger of seeing what others don't. Once you see deeply enough, you begin to see that everyone is carrying a universe inside them, yet most people have never been shown the way into their own depths. You see that others are not blind, only afraid. Afraid of their own power, their own truth, their own capacity to break the story they inherited. And this realization softens you. It humbles you. It reveals the secret that all mystics eventually discover. Those who see more are not meant to stand above. They are meant to stand within. As witnesses, not judges. As reminders, not authorities. As companions on the path, not gatekeepers of it. This is where part 2 begins. In the tension between vision and responsibility, insight and isolation, awakening and belonging. Because the danger of seeing what others don't is not merely in being misunderstood. It is in learning how to carry a truth that changes you, challenges you, and calls you into a life you may not yet feel ready to live. But readiness has never been the requirement for awakening. Only honesty, only courage, only the willingness to take the next step into the unknown. There comes a moment in every seer's life when the question stops being, "Why do I see differently?" and becomes, "What now?" Because vision without integration becomes torment. It hollows the ribs. It stretches a person between worlds until they feel thin and transparent, like a page worn by too much reading. So part 2 begins not with revelation, but with the quiet reckoning that follows it. The tremor after the earthquake. When the ground of your understanding shifts, the aftershocks ripple through every part of your existence. You start noticing it in the smallest details. In the conversations where your truth no longer fits. In the rituals you continue out of habit rather than alignment. In the people whose presence once felt comforting, but now feels like an old costume that no longer fits your bones. There is no malice in this. Only the natural consequence of awakening. People often imagine enlightenment as a burst of light. But it's closer to watching a building you've lived in for years quietly crumble. Not violently, but in a way that reveals its foundations were never stable to begin with. This is why vision feels dangerous. It changes the architecture of your belonging. You begin to understand that some relationships were built on the mutual agreement to stay asleep together. Some conversations only worked because both parties accepted the same illusions. Some ambitions were scaffolding for identities that are now dissolving. And when you try to explain this shift, people say, "You're overthinking. You're being dramatic. You've changed. What happened to you?" They don't realize that these questions are not accusations. They are confessions. They reveal how little people expect others to grow. But here is the truth you must hold gently. You are not obligated to remain the person others remember. Growth is not betrayal. Awakening is not arrogance. Vision is not distance. Though it may create space, you are simply shedding skins that were too tight, habits that were too small, stories that were too shallow for who you are becoming. The fear that hides in vision. But the danger of seeing is not solely external. There is another threat, a silent one, that grows inside the newly awakened. The fear of standing alone. You wonder, if I keep seeing deeper, will I lose everyone? Will I outgrow every bond? Will I end up wandering through life as the lone person who sees the sky a different color? This fear is ancient. You can feel it in your throat, in your chest, in the hollow between your shoulder blades. Human beings were not designed for isolation. The tribe once meant survival, and the nervous system carries that memory like a scar. So when you begin to see what others don't, your body interprets this difference as danger. It whispers, "Return, blend in, forget what you saw, disappear your vision, shrink your intensity, become palatable." This is the fork in the road for every seeker. Down one path lies self-abandonment, a repression of your own truth so deep you begin to forget who you were becoming. Down the other lies authenticity, a road that requires courage, solitude, humility, and devotion. And standing at the crossroad, you realize something profound. Vision asks you to choose yourself long before anyone else does. It is the first initiation. The world of masks. There is a peculiar clarity that comes with seeing through illusions. You no longer take anger at face value. You see the wound beneath it. You no longer believe the facade of confidence. You see the trembling beneath the armor. You no longer fall for performance. You perceive the longing behind the script. You start to understand that most human behavior is not intentional. It is protective. People defend themselves not from reality, but from feeling too deeply. They cling to certainty not because it is true, but because it is familiar. Seeing this is both a blessing and a burden. Because when you see people's pain, your heart naturally softens. Judgment loosens. Compassion grows. But compassion without boundaries becomes martyrdom. You begin to absorb the emotions of others. You begin to carry burdens that do not belong to you. You begin to play the roles of healer, counselor, translator, guide. Roles no one asked you to play, roles you never consciously volunteered for. This is one of the great dangers of vision. Those who see deeply often forget that they, too, are allowed to be human. Not every insight needs expression. Not every pain needs rescuing. Not every silence needs breaking. When you carry the lantern, people feel drawn to your warmth. But they also expect you to never let it dim. And the seer, inexperienced with boundaries, tries to keep the flame burning for everyone. Eventually, the light flickers. The exhaustion sets in. The soul grows tired. And so another lesson emerges. Seeing does not make you responsible for the sight of others. You are not the steward of anyone's awakening. You are not the keeper of their truth. You can illuminate, but you cannot carry someone across their own threshold. The turning point, when vision becomes self-realization. A strange grace begins to unfold when you finally stop trying to explain yourself. You realize that vision is less about what you see, and more about who you become. Awakening is not a collection of insights. It is a transformation of identity. You begin to understand that the danger was never in seeing, but in assuming that others must see the same. People awaken in their own season. Some in crisis, some in silence, some never in this lifetime. And that is their path, not yours to orchestrate. This acceptance marks the second initiation, the shift from seeker to witness. You stop trying to convert your insights into language others can digest. You stop attempting to justify the changes in your life. You stop trying to convince anyone that your perspective is valid. Instead, you embody it. You live your truth quietly, like a mountain that does not announce itself, yet remains impossible to ignore. And it is here, in this stillness, that vision deepens. Because when you no longer perform your awakening, you finally experience it. The noise recedes. The world sharpens. Your inner voice grows clearer. You stop reacting and start understanding. And the loneliness that once haunted you begins to feel like spaciousness. A sanctuary. A home. You discover that you can walk among the asleep without dimming your awareness and without resenting their dreams. This is the maturity of vision and its true power. The kingdom within the silence. One evening, perhaps after a long day, perhaps after a heartbreak, perhaps after nothing in particular, you find yourself sitting alone in a quiet room. No distractions, no noise, just breath. And in that silence, something shifts. You realize the separation you felt from others was never a sign that you were different, only that you had not yet gone deep enough. Because beneath the stories, the masks, the fears, the illusions, beneath everything you have ever seen, there is a shared human essence, a pulse that belongs to everyone, a stillness that connects all things, a presence that watches through every pair of eyes. And you begin to understand the secret long known to sages. To see what others don't is not to see more, but to see the same truth through fewer layers. The world has always been awake. People have always been luminous. Life has always been sacred. You are not separate from them. You are simply aware of the thread that ties every heart together. And when you see this, when you truly feel it in your body, in your breath, in the quiet architecture of your soul, the danger dissolves. Vision becomes love. Insight becomes service. Awakening becomes humility. Difference becomes unity. You begin to walk differently. Not above the world, but within it. Not as an outsider, but as one who recognizes the divine hidden in the ordinary. This is the final initiation, the transformation of the seer into the awakened participant. And from here, your life begins again, not as someone who sees what others do, but as someone who sees with clarity and moves with compassion. The journey continues toward conclusion, toward integration, toward the final understanding of what vision asks of you. And from that understanding arises one final offering, the visual language of awakening.